Morning. Welcome to another SDIG forum. Today we've seen what is happening around the world. The spokesperson for United Nations Children Agency, UNICEF, said, I quote, "Nothing could prepare me for the recent mission in Gaza." He continued, in my 20 years with UNICEF, traveling from one humanitarian crisis to next, from famine to flood, and war zones to refugee camps, I have simply never seen such devastation and despair as is happening in Gaza, he wrote. I think this actually, yes, not the power of what I personally have seen that propelled me to say we're going to discuss these things, that if we don't discuss it and don't talk about it, it's not conforming with the values and mission of SDIG. And I felt compelled that we're going to talk about it. And luckily, I was able to get some eminent qualified people to discuss it, perhaps give us their views, ideas, and in fact, educate us. Because oftentimes, some people are not well informed, but they jump into one wagon or the other. But I do believe that for those who don't know, for me, I can tell you that I've done a lot of studies about the Middle East that I never had done before. And I feel pretty informed, but I can't say that I'm informed as much as the guests we have here. So we had so many bottlenecks getting things started on time. Even around through 3 computers to get to this one I'm in. And of course, other shortcomings. But we are nevertheless happy to have all of you here. And this session will begin by my making comments, which is about SDIG. SDIG is premised on the view that we're gonna open environment where everyone could share his or her views on any issue. And further, that we will stand for fairness, equity, and social justice at every point in time, even when it's difficult. And that's exactly what we stand for. So today is a pleasure to have this gentleman. I have Marc Brenman, who has done quite a bit, whether it's in federal government on his writing or in the organization which happened to share with him. And we have Professor Rashid, who has done so much in the area. My first discussion with him, he told me about his first paper, which I'm sure he probably will be talking about. And then, of course, I have Tia, who had experienced firsthand the impact of marginalization, the impact of racism, among others, pain he shared with Nelson Mandela of ANC. So it's my pleasure to have them. So my first question, Dr. Sahid, can you turn your camera, or it doesn't work for you there?
Oh, my camera is actually on. For some reason, you all can't see me. That's what they're working on.
Okay. Yeah. That adds to the problem we have today. Well, we still prevail. Okay. Today, I'm going to begin by asking questions and each person is expected to answer within 3 minutes. But for the first question, you have quite maximum number of minutes. This is the time which, when you have, if you have a video to show or flyer to show, this is the right time for you to do it. As I said, prepare 3 to 10 minutes elevation pitch to introduce yourself, your work, and then discuss your understanding of the history of Palestinian and Israel, of course, including how we got here. And I will take the first question to my friend, Marc.
Good morning. Just to introduce myself, good morning from California. Speaking of, internationalism, I'm a mostly retired federal and state civil rights executive in the United States. And currently I write books and do some teaching and training and presenting on human rights topics. I've lived in the Middle East. I'm Jewish, and I've studied contemporary Palestine and Israel quite a bit.
Okay. All right. So let's shift gear to the professor, the eminent professor in Georgia. Could you please respond to the same question?
Sure.
You want me to repeat it or read it out, or are you okay with it?
No, I can hear you if you all can hear me. The camera doesn't seem to be working still.
Don't worry about camera. Don't worry about camera. Just,
yeah, I'm not that pretty anyway. So okay, so I was originally born and grew up in India, and I've since studied and worked in Australia and in England and here, of course, in the United States. I've been interested in and following this issue of the ongoing conflict in the region from really my undergraduate days, when I still remember writing my first undergraduate paper on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And of course, I teach Middle East politics too, so I have to keep up with it, which I would have otherwise anyway. So that's what I essentially do. I teach at my university, and we look at various issues. And one of the subjects that I'm interested in and teach is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as part of my wider course on Middle East politics. So, and if I may, I think we want us to also say a few words about what our perspective is on this issue. So I'll just say that quickly. I think that it's very important for all of us, if the goal here is to increase a better understanding and positions of all sides on this issue, and if the goal is to hopefully move this conflict towards some kind of a fair and just solution, we really need to understand what are the driving forces behind the conflict. And for that to happen, we should be really looking at the two ideologies involved in the conflict. On one side, we have a version of Palestinian nationalism, and on the other side, we have a version of political Zionism. And I think if we understand where these ideologies emerged and what they are about, we might be able to find a solution which hopefully will work to end this terrible ongoing conflict. And there's very little agreement among people about this, mainly because people are ideologically committed to one side or the other. And therefore, I think it is really important that we be able to just talk about the facts. Everybody, hopefully in this meeting at least, are adults who can reach their own conclusions. But we do need to do that as a background for us to have any discussion about what the possible solutions are. I have my own ideas and preferences about a solution, but that we will leave to the end if we have time to talk about.
Thank you so much. I think that frames it quite the way we want it. We are engaging in discussion, in learning more for those who haven't known, because the way things go, things go these days, that people attach themselves to one word or the other without even understanding what it is. And that's what brought us the fake news and the misconceptions. And with modern AI, I don't know where we're going to go. But I just wish that things could turn out to be good for humanity's sake. So my second question, there's an old saying that goes, if you don't know where the rain began to beat you, you won't know where the rain stops. To that end, assume you are asked to introduce layperson to the history of Palestinian and Israelis. What would you tell them? And I think this would go to Marc.
Well, Joseph, I guess I would tell them that the issues are very complicated, as is everything in the Middle East. There are religious, geographical, natural resources, ideological, cultural, and historic issues that often overlap. I might begin 100 years ago with World War I, in which the Ottoman Empire, which was Islamic, sided with Germany in World War I and lost. Its former possessions, so-called, in the Middle East were divided among the United Kingdom and France. Some places became independent, such as Saudi Arabia and Jordan, although Saudi Arabia had nominally always been independent, with puppet rulers installed by the British. Palestine was transferred to the United Kingdom as what was then called a mandate, so that the true colonial power in the Middle East was the Ottoman Empire. We have a lot of problems with terminology with the current crisis, including the word colonialism. So beginning in the late 1880s, a movement arose in Eastern and Central Europe for Jews to return to Palestine and create what was then called a national homeland. But in addition, there was a small number of Jews who had never left Palestine. As the Jewish population increased in Palestine, although it was severely limited in immigration by the United Kingdom, disputes arose between Muslim Palestinians and Jewish Palestinians. On the other hand, a number of Palestinian landowners sold land to the incoming European settlers. A movement arose in the 1930s for there to be an independent country called Israel, and at the same time, a movement for nationalism arose among Palestinians. So we had conflicting nationalist movements in the same geographic area. After World War II, partly due to sympathy in Europe and the United States after the Holocaust, there began to grow some international support for the idea of a Jewish national homeland. And then this idea was pushed on by what were then Jewish advocates and Jewish terrorists. And as in many places, eventually terrorists become Democrats. A partition was designed that provided certain land areas to the Jews and certain land areas to the Palestinians. And the United Kingdom finally agreed to leave, and Jews declared independence, the creation of what they call the State of Israel. And immediately it was attacked by a loose coalition of surrounding Arab countries and some Palestinians. This was called a war of independence. The Israelis called it a war of independence. And the nascent State of Israel prevailed in this conflict. And then what happened next is subject to great debate that is still being debated today. Some Palestinians left and others were forced out. Since then, there have been a series of wars between Israel and surrounding Arab countries, each of which Israel won, and through this winning expanded its territory. This has been the way of the victor in wars since time immemorial. Opposition to the so-called right of conquest is one of a number of ways that Israel is judged differently than other countries. The US pushed out the indigenous population of North America. Hindu Indians pushed out Muslims after Indian independence in 1948. China invaded and conquered Tibet. The Soviet Union conquered Central and Eastern Europe, etc., etc. In more recent years, especially after the United States invaded Iraq and deposed the leader of Iraq, this created additional problems because Iraq was the sole counterbalance to Iran. And Iran became much more powerful in the Middle East, and they now fund and supply military proxies in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Pakistan. So the Iranians, like the Turks, are almost entirely Muslim, but they're not Arabs. And so this proxy warfare supplied by Iran continues today. And what distinguishes the current fighting is its magnitude. So I always maintain there aren't just two sides to this issue of Palestine-Israel. There are many sides. And the third and perhaps the most powerful one is Iran. So I think any discussion of these issues that does not include these other powers is not going to move toward understanding and toward solving the issues.
Thank you very much. Reverend, I'll be coming to you in just a moment. Let's hear from the other person, because your purpose here is gonna be clear when you speak about the way out of where we are, or at least give suggestions. So I'm gonna go back to Dr. Rashid. Dr. Rashid, could you answer the same question, the one I phrased by saying that if you don't know where it began, you wouldn't know where it stops. Sure. And then I went further to say, if you could be talking to a layman or lay people, how would you describe the Middle East issue or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Sure. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Brennan, for your comments, though I find them very selective and one-sided. Just to make a couple of quick points here, and then I'll move to my main point that I wanted to make. About the conflict being between Jews and Muslims. That is not true. The conflict in Palestine is between Palestinians and Jews, or Zionists actually, and because 20% of the Palestinian population is Christian, and some of the most radical leaders of the Palestinian movement, George Habash, Naim, were both Christians. So this is not a Muslim-Jewish conflict. This is one of those misconceptions which I think cause us to have bigger problems in any attempt to solve it. A couple of other quick things. After the partition of India, as you mentioned, Muslims were not driven out of India by the Hindu population. That is not correct. And you talk about the Soviet Union's occupation of Eastern Europe after the Second World War, or the US occupation of Iraq. All those did not include the Soviet Union or the United States moving their own population into occupied or conquered territory. So that's very important to understand. As far as the use of conquest is concerned, legally under international law since the end of the Second World War, the position has been that acquisition of territory by force is no longer acceptable. And any places where this has happened has always been treated the same way. So, but that's a separate issue now. Let me get back to the main point I want to make. I think that the root of this conflict is an ideological conflict, and it's not between Muslims and Jews, because there are Muslims and Jews on all sides of this conflict, but really is a conflict which comes out of a certain ideology, which, as Mr. Brennan mentioned, emerged in Europe in the late 18th century, late 19th century, and that was, and I want to make something very important clear here, because if we don't have empathy for people who are suffering for no fault of their own, then we'll never get anywhere. And so the horrific treatment of Jews in Europe, which we are all familiar with, is very important to keep in mind as we talk about what I'm going to say now. So after you had this great movement about how we are going to have a new Europe where religious bigotry is going to be not important anymore, and so the Great Enlightenment, as it's called, there was a great hope among European Jews that the long history of anti-Semitism in Europe was going to go away. Right? That didn't happen, of course. And so by the late 19th century, there was a great deal of disillusionment, rightly so, among Europe's Jewish population, and that was that things were not going to change. So it is in this context that we see the rise of political Zionism as an ideology. There is religious Zionism, but this is not what we are talking about. We are talking about political Zionism. And as we all know, the founder of this movement was a person called Theodor Herzl, who was a journalist living in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, who in 1896 published a booklet called Judenstaat, German, which means Jewish state. And what he argued there was very interesting, because really he was a man of his time. He represented 19th century European thinking, right? So what does he say in this state? Some of the things he's saying are things which were said before. Like, for example, there was a threat to the European Jews of being physically annihilated or assimilated into Europe's population in a way where they would not be able to retain their identity, both valid points, and other people had been saying this too. He also concluded that Jews would never get a fair deal in Europe. And so far, again, there are other people in the same period who are writing this. But then he comes up with two ideas which were unique. One was that being Jewish is a nationhood, like the British are a nation, or a French are a nation, or the Germans are a nation, which was something which was not normally thought of, because Judaism, like Islam and Christianity and other major religions, is a universal religion which claims to have a message, like all of them do, for all of humanity. But this notion that somehow being Jewish was an ethnic identity was put forward, and it was put forward for a very specific reason, because we are talking about 19th century Europe, where the prevailing ideology was the best way to maintain international peace is to give each ethnic group of people a state of their own, hence the idea of a nation state. Right? So we ended up with all of Europe being organized along those lines. So Herzl, as a follow-up to his claim that being Jewish was an ethnicity in the sense that being French or German or so on was, argued that the solution, therefore, to the problems that the Jews of Europe were facing was a Jewish state. And so modern political Zionism is essentially based on that idea, that the solution to the persecution of Jews in Europe, right, was the creation of a state for Jews. Right? This, of course, led to the formation of the World Zionist Organization, whose goal was to establish such a state. Herzl was his president. His diaries, by the way, make excellent reading, because it gives you an insight into late 19th century European mindset, both his own comments and what other people were telling him. The goal was to negotiate with every major European power. Two things were taken for granted. Number one, that such a state for Jews would never happen in Europe. It was unthinkable that the Europeans would allow a state for Jews, even though all these people they're talking about are European Jews. Number two, that this could only happen if one of the major world powers worked with them to do it. So Herzl's diaries talk about his negotiations with the Russian Empire, with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with the British, with the French, with the Germans, with the Americans, with the Ottoman Empire. And in each case, what he was offering them, again, was a very late 18th century, sorry, late 19th century way of thinking, which was you help us establish a state, right? He was very practical about it, and we will protect your interests in that part of the world. I know today it is politically incorrect to say things like that, but we are talking about 19th century Europe. That's how Europeans thought, right? And the implication being that we are, after all, Europeans, and we will protect your interests in that part of the world. So this by the way, we don't have time for this, so I'm not going into this right now, but we can maybe during question and answer session. This was considered to be a fringe movement within the Jewish community, right? Both from the Jewish religious establishment, who came out vehemently against this idea for religious reasons, and then there were also secular people from the Jewish community who also opposed the idea for secular reasons. But we won't go into that right now, but we can later on if we want to. The British were the first one to buy into this. So just to give you an idea of how this idea originated, in 1903, they came up with what's called the Uganda Proposal, which was to establish such a state for the Jews, European Jews, in Uganda, right? And Herzl, the founder of the movement, actually endorsed this idea. He then takes it to the World Zionist Organization's annual meeting, where it is rejected, and they say, no, if such a state is going to happen, it can only be in Palestine for historical reasons. Right? The British, who were referred to earlier and who, of course, were a major imperial power, were the ones who in 1917, again, issued a declaration, which is known as the Balfour Declaration. And it is actually very short. So if you allow me, I'll just read it. It's 86 words or something like that. Only the British can write something like this, by the way. It says, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So this was the Balfour Declaration. And by the way, just as a quick aside here, at this point, when the Balfour Declaration was issued, of course, Palestine was not British territory. It was, as Mr. Brenman pointed out, a part of the Ottoman Empire. And so that's one thing. And the other thing was, of course, that the Balfour Declaration talks about the non-Jewish communities in Palestine and their no prejudice to their civil and religious rights. The non-Jewish communities, that is the Arabs and Christian population of Palestine, amounted to 90% of the population. Just so that everybody is clear about how the demographics of this region have changed and what impact that has had on this conflict. The British had signed a couple of other agreements, including one with Sharif Hussein of Makkah, where they had said, hey, if you rebel against the Ottomans, we'll establish an Arab state which covers all this region, all that kind of stuff. Again, we won't go into that. So after the war, mainly because the Americans had entered the war under the understanding that Wilson's 14 points would be implemented after the war, right? That didn't happen. And the British and the French came up with this new idea of mandates, under which they took the non-European territories of the defeated powers, whether they were in Africa or the Pacific or in the Middle East, and divided it among themselves under the name of being mandates. And the idea behind mandates, and we are talking about the 1914-18 period, was that some people are not mature enough to govern themselves, right? And therefore they should be placed under the rule of others until they're mature enough to rule themselves. And so these territories were handed out. The great nascent apartheid state of South Africa got Namibia. The British got Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and the French got in the region, got Syria and Lebanon as mandate territories. The British announced that as part of their mandate agreement, they were going to implement the Balfour Declaration. And so we see that the British established their administration. The World Zionist Organization established another body called the Jewish Agency, which was headquartered in Jerusalem, whose goal was to facilitate the migration of European Jews to to the region. I want to point out something which is really important for us to keep in mind, that once a conflict starts, it escalates. I keep saying European Jews, because prior to 1948, there was very little history of anti-Semitism in the region, or in fact in other parts of the world. I'm from India. There was a Jewish community which lived in India for centuries. Nobody was putting them in gas chambers. Nobody was carrying out programs against their places of work and so on and so forth. So this was a particularly European problem. As a gentleman who was speaking the other day was saying that the Palestinians are the victims of Europe's victims. Right? And so anyway, without going into that, those are all old things. So we see the changing demographics of Palestine, just to give you those numbers, and then I'm going to talk about the establishment of Israel and all the issues around that, and then I'm going to stop, because in many ways the conflict is really frozen at that point. So let me just say a few more words. So in 1919, the last census before the British Mandate was established, the Arab population was 90%. By Arab, I mean both Christian and Muslim Arab. And then Jewish population was 10%. By 1929, the Arab population was 83%, 10 years later, and the Jewish population was 17%. By 1939, the Arab population was 70%, the Jewish population was 30%. And in 1947, before the British took this matter to the United Nations, the Arab population was down to 68%, and the Jewish population was 32%. And this change in population was almost exclusively because of migration of Jews from Europe into the region. Right? It isn't as if the Jews had a higher birth rate than the Arabs or anything. They're pretty much consistent. So while, as you can understand, all over the world where these mandates have been established, the local populations are opposed to the mandates, and I'm not talking about the rest of the region. I'll just talk about Palestine. There was a series of uprisings against the British in Palestine in 1920-21, the year the mandates were established, 1928, 1933, let me see, and the big one in 1936-38. And the demands that these people were making was, we want a date when the British are going to leave, and we want an end to the migration of Europeans here into Palestine. As Mr. Brennan pointed out, there was a very old Jewish population living in Palestine, right? And that population had lived in harmony with their Arab neighbors for centuries again. So Arab and Muslim and Christian neighbors, by the way. So anyway, at the end of the day, without going into this too much, there were all kinds of partition plans, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, though, the British gave up on all of this, mainly because at the end of the Second World War, the British were really finished as a world power. And they wanted to get rid of all these things which had become too many entanglements for them. So they took the matter to the United Nations, said, here, you solve it. The United Nations then establishes something called a special commission. Remember, I want to point out here, the United Nations at this time was almost exclusively a European and America's organization. Most of Africa was still colonized, and so were large parts of Asia. So anyway, this special commission was set up, which consisted of, just so that everybody has a clear picture, Australia, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Guatemala, India, Iran, Netherlands, Peru, Sweden, Uruguay, and Yugoslavia. And they were sent there, okay, guys, go there, figure out what's going on, and come up with recommendations. The commission went there, by all accounts, by everybody on all sides, agreed that the commission did a good job. They came back and they couldn't agree on a solution. Right? So there were two reports which were submitted. One was a majority report, which called for a partition of Palestine into an Arab state and a Jewish state, right, with Jerusalem under international control. That was the majority plan. And then there was the minority plan, which called for a single state in Palestine with Jerusalem as a capital. And the state would be a federation consisting of Arabs and Jews with equal rights and all that kind of stuff. The minority report was backed by the only two non-European American members on the commission, India and Iran, plus Yugoslavia. But as I said, the politics of the UN was very different in those days. The majority plan was accepted, and I wish I was able to project.
Okay, Doctor, you're gonna stop there. Let's continue on that if time permits. We're gonna go to Said, and Sia, the question I have for you is essentially about what your thoughts are. Let's visit an American historian, David McCullough's statement. In 2017, he wrote before he died, everyone who ever lived has been affected, changed, shaped, helped, or hindered by others. It is clear that all Palestinians and the Israelis have been affected by this never-ending conflict. What does tomorrow hold? The good pastor. What are possible solutions to prevent the conflict? Keeping in mind that the League of Nations, which was incapable of performing the duty it was supposed to perform, gave rise to United Nations. And it appears to me, based on what I've been reading, that United Nations is incapable of doing anything. Perhaps the League of Nations was more powerful to doing things. So my view is that perhaps it's time to change United Nations and constitute it with more representative organization. But however, I don't want to draw conclusion. This is a question for you, Reverend Sia Twani. Could you please comment on that?
Just repeat that question one more time.
Oh, I was saying that obviously both Palestinians and Israelis have been affected by this continuous conflict. And the question then becomes, because we know that they've been affected, and we are in this kind of a situation where we don't know what to do. Netanyahu, I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu was like Rabin, who wanted peace. I quite frankly would say that perhaps we may have to figure how do we find peace. Or are we gonna live in a world where we will say winner take all? The stronger you are, the more you're able to take the weak one. Or do we have to find a way to ameliorate the situation so that we can adhere to humanity and prevent this kind of terrible, terrible things happening, both the one that happened on October 7th and subsequently the carnage that is going on as we speak. So my question to you is, would you give us ideas as to how do we move forward in a way that we can create perhaps a better solution than what is happening now?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nwoye. Thank you to my two learned colleagues. I salute both of my colleagues who just spoke before me. I thank you both for taking the time to prepare for today and to share from your hearts, and both academically, politically, and culturally, and from wherever you're coming from, to enrich us. The word to teach in my mother tongue is ukufundisa. We are causing each other to learn. You learn and I learn, and together we grow. You have expanded my knowledge, and I thank you both for that. But at the same time, I'm conscious, before I talk about solutions, I'm conscious of the danger of one-sided story. Yeah, I think there's a book out there. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. And so we hear from two different perspectives, historically, politically, ideologically. And I think it'll be fair to say that in some things we have to agree to disagree respectfully. I think we have to come to that understanding we must agree to disagree. I think that's one way forward, because if you only see life in one dimension, one political, theological dimension, we'd lose opportunity to learn from others and to be enriched by others, because I think that then we'd border on the dangers of arrogance. So I thank you both for not just sticking to one story from your historical perspectives. So for me, I have a lived experience of conflict as a Black South African. I've lived through conflict of apartheid. Actually, I draw the parallels between Israeli oppression of the Arabs and the apartheid oppression of Black South Africans. It's interesting that the state of Israel came to power in 1948, so it did apartheid. That's our history, and I will never. So I draw the parallels between those two, that Israel and apartheid are the same. And I've gone through, as a Black South African, through the immense racial trauma and exploitation and not being seen and not heard, just like the Palestinians. So I think the first thing for us as humans is to seek first to understand and to be understood. Of course, Netanyahu is not seeking first to understand. You talked about Rabin. It's interesting that America and Britain never listened to the pain and the oppression of Black South Africans. It was Palestinians. It was Arafat. It was Gaddafi. It was Cuba, Fidel Castro, who listened to the pain and of oppression. They gave some tools to topple down the apartheid. So I find it interesting that white, Jewish, not all of them in America, especially those pro-Zionist, who see nothing wrong about what's happening in Israel, which pains me, because we always say that there is only one human race. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that is true, actually, because in my view, it feels like there's selective justice, there's selective rights. Yeah, the rights are only for Israeli. What about the Palestinians? There's selective human freedoms. What about the freedoms of the Palestinians? Yeah, I think we need to seek first to understand and to be understood. And I'm not going to suggest a way forward just to put a plaster on the wound. I think that's cheap justice. I think when we talk about reconciliation, understanding, and forgiveness, and finding a way forward, I think this is a good forum. This is a mini truth and reconciliation forum, just like we had in South Africa, where the perpetrator sat with the victim. And I think we need to cascade these conversations, not just here, to include all the other peoples who may not be necessarily seeing things from the same perspective. That the aim of the TRC was to enable the perpetrator to understand the trauma they inflicted, the pain. And I think Israel, you need to sit down and listen. Netanyahu is not in that place to understand. The UN, I'm glad my colleague Rashid pointed out that it was predominantly white, yeah, and African, Asian countries were excluded from that those conversations. It's interesting that you draw the parallel between what the British and Americans did planting in Namibia and South Africa, those puppet homelands. And so as a way forward, we need to start listening to each other respectfully and create understanding forums where we can have these uncomfortable conversations without the fear of being judged or being misunderstood. Yeah?
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you very, very much. I think we're gonna continue to put every energy we can, because there's nothing like conversation.
Yeah.
If you don't discuss and get to understand one another, how are we gonna get to peace?
Of course.
It's kind of difficult. So
Yeah.
we owe it to the world, and for those who talk about humanity, that we're gonna go through that path. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna have just 2 questions they will answer, then we shift to the audience. You can see that we had a lot of disruptions and finally began. So bear with me that it taken a little more time. Rashid, Dr. Rashid, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, actually, I was. I just wanted to make a quick comment on Reverend Twani's point that he made, and also to answer your question on the way forward.
Okay, please.
Okay, so first of all, Reverend Twani, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
That's correct.
I think that your South Africa parallel is, in my view, quite valid. But I think even more valid is how South Africa dealt with this after the end of apartheid. That the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, believe me, the first political demonstration I went to in my life was one calling for the freedom of Nelson Mandela way back in India when I think I was even in high school at that point. But I had feared that there would be a terrible bloodbath once apartheid fell. And thanks to that person in particular, we did not see that. And that shows a kind of character and strength, which is what is needed if we are going to resolve this issue at all. I think keeping in mind the values that we all profess, there are only two possible solutions to this conflict. Right? One which I think is, at least in terms of values, not the correct one. And the other one, in terms of values, is the correct one. And unfortunately, at this point, one which is less popular on both sides, right? So one solution which everybody talks about is a two-state solution. Right? And even though the current Israeli government basically has abandoned that idea, at least in theory, various Israeli governments have said in the past a two-state solution. And generally, as we know, about 85% of the members of the United Nations at this point actually recognize the state of Palestine within the pre-1967 boundaries, that is West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. So that's one solution, where you separate the two and let each of them go their own way, which I think is maybe a solution, but there are other issues involved with that. The other solution, which I think is the real solution based on values that we all claim to profess, that is the values of people living together and having equal rights and equal say, is a much more difficult thing to achieve, but is what we should be pushing for. And that is a single state solution. With equal rights to all communities, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it Israel, you can call it Palestine, you can call it anything under the sun. All these are title names, they don't mean anything. The real value would be that these the peoples who are living in that territory now should all be given equal rights. And as we know, the 40% population, which is the Palestinian population now in all of Palestine, including the West Bank and Gaza and Israel, the West Bank people have no rights. They're not Israeli citizens because Israel has not officially annexed the West Bank, right? The people in Gaza have no rights again. And the Israeli Palestinians who are living as Palestinians, Israeli citizens of Palestine, have complained for a long time of double standards against them and so on. So I'm not going to go into that. But I think the long-term solution, the only long-term solution is, in my view, which is unpopular with both sides, by the way, at this point, is a single state with equal rights to everybody. And you can solve this problem this way in the long run, in my view.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. Let me go to Marc. I was coming to you. You can respond however you want, and at the end, I would like you to ask Dr. Rashid a question, and in turn, I would like him to ask you a question. And then as soon as we do that, we shift to questions from the audience.
Oh, thank you. In terms of a path forward, I think there are a couple of possibilities. One is what philosophers call aporia, which means there may not be a solution. There are some problems in the world to which there simply are not solutions. And so that would lead to continuing conflict indefinitely into the future. So that's certainly one possibility. Another possibility is the model from the confrontation and dispute between the Western democracies and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, which is something like Cold War, containment, and détente. Although the Cold War was certainly, criticized a great deal, it had the advantage that as long as the Cold War and the Iron Curtain existed, the two sides weren't flinging rockets at each other. So there would be some benefits to a Cold War type of solution. So I don't subscribe to the possibility of either a one-state or a two-state solution. Nor am I a believer in, a solution where we can all just get along. I don't think people do that. So my short answer as to the future and resolution of the conflict is that A, there may be no solution, or what philosophers call aporia, or B, some sort of a Cold War containment and détente solution.
Wow.
Can I jump-
Marc,
can I jump-
you depressed me, Marc.
can I jump in? Can I jump in?
No solution.
Doctor, can I jump in?
Marc, I do believe that anything we have, no matter the gravity of it, if people with good heart, for the sake of human being, people believing in golden rule principle, working together, there has to be solution.
Doctor, can I jump in?
Sure.
Marc, thank you for I don't necessarily agree with your view, but you're entitled to your view. But I'm a man of hope. I tell people wherever I go, I'm not a victim of apartheid. I am a victor of apartheid. I'm a bringer of hope. I believe that human beings have got a potential for the good, not just the bad, for the good. And I finish off with this, that through love and understanding, we can make this world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Can I just?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. No, I was saying that there are two forms of realism. One is what I call the pessimistic form, which is, oh, nothing is going to change. Let's just keep doing this to each other for another 100 years. And the other is that if there is a will on both sides, any conflict can be resolved. Right? Any conflict. And when I look at the case of South Africa, I point to that as an example of, things are not the best in the world, but at least there's no bloodbath going on. And the bottom line is that until, and I think if nothing else, the current ongoing conflict in Gaza is evidence, right, that the Palestinians are not just going to go away. That's not going to happen, right? And so somehow this idea of let's contain them, as in fact the Israelis have been trying to contain Hamas in Gaza since 2006, or in the West Bank, since, for that matter, during this period, has not worked. It is not going to work because there is a fundamental issue here of at least one side feeling that it has been horribly disadvantaged and treated, and that the only way to resolve this conflict is to come up with a solution where both sides at least meet some of the basic conditions for them to be able to live together. And by the way, this idea that Jews and Arabs can't live together, is a fantasy idea that they can't live together. They have lived together for centuries.
They have.
For centuries, with as religious people, by the way, not as political parties, but as religious people. They have lived together for centuries. Have there been periods when there's been conflict between them? Yes, they have. But they have lived together for centuries at the same time. As we know, they were actually rabbis in 1948 in Palestine, that is old Jewish community rabbis, who ordered their congregations to migrate after the state of Israel was established. They were so opposed to the idea. So this is not a Muslim-Jewish conflict. This is a conflict between two ideologies, and those conflicts are always resolvable in my view.
I agree.
All right. You know, I really think that you've all made us better informed. I'm sure that for me personally, I think you guys have given me a lot to chew. And I would like for us to even continue this because it's very necessary. It's very necessary for forging what we could come up with. Now, I wanna differ the question from Marc to Naim, and then let them to Marc. So let's go to the audience to see if they have some questions that we could touch before we go to the Honorable Sia to give us words of encouragement that could, we could take with us while we are living to figure how we can fight for the humanity. Everybody wants joy. Everybody wants happiness. The question is, how can we get there? And we must not relent in walking through that to contribute however we can contribute to that view. So, is there any question from audience? Anybody that may have a question for this our wonderful guests? No question?
Interesting.
Okay. Would you ask Rashid question mark? And in turn, Rashid would ask you, and of course, Caesar can ask questions to everyone if he wants.
Well, I think it's it's a very interesting analogy with South Africa and the freedom struggle and the anti-apartheid struggle. I just don't know how good an analogy that is for the Palestine-Israel conflict. I think absolutely the former situation in South Africa is very well worth studying, and there are some excellent lessons to be learned from it. I'm just not sure that it really is a good analogy to Israel and Palestine. My instinct is telling me that it's not a good analogy, but I'm just not sure, and I'd be curious to hear a little more discussion as to why some people think it is a good analogy to the situation in Israel and Palestine.
Okay. I wanna ask you just for just exercise a patience for just a minute. Just a minute, because I think that this discussion is worthy of having and having more and more of it. Marc, I hear you when you say that you don't think the way you see that is not a good analogy, but I would think that to some degree, I'm gonna share this. I'm gonna share this with you guys. It's gonna be 8 minutes. It is something I'm working on that I think it really captures we're saying here. So if you could just listen for it for just a moment, and then hopefully we can begin to work on it. Where is it? Adam, could you give me access to do this, please? Okay. Okay. Now let me go back here. We'll go back here. Okay. This is about 7 minutes. I think it may be something we can think about as we work on this very important issue. Oh gosh, come on now.
Dr. Nwoye, the audio is not there.
It's not? Can you hear
Yes,
it now?
No, actually you need to enable sound while sharing it.
Wait a second. You said I need to do what?
While you're sharing your screen, you need to enable sound. It must be there at top of your screen.
Oh, I thought I did. Okay, let me go back then. Sorry. Okay, the sound, where are we? Okay. Yeah, I said sharing. I think I was. Okay, let me try again. You technology wizards. Okay, let's go back and see. Oh, sorry, guys. I think that this could probably help us on.
Um, I don't hear anything. I'm so sorry to intervene.
Oh, you don't hear it, so other people don't hear it. Okay.
No, we don't hear a thing.
You can hear it?
No.
You can't?
No.
Okay, let me stop it then. I don't know what's happening. It would have been, but let me just say in a nutshell. What it's about is that when we are born to our parents, we are born to our relatives, and the environment in which they live. And as we grow, we absorb all these things. We absorb all these things, which shapes how we behave. And if you have someone who teaches you to be racist, you grow up. By the time you go to school, it's too late. You cannot change that. So to just share what I would think we could visit is that if we look at the Stanford professor Leon Festinger's cognitive dissident theory, where before you can change, first, you have to have disequilibrium of your thinking. And then that disequilibrium will push you to seeing things differently. And when you see things differently, perhaps it may help to shift the misconception one may have or misperception one may have to a better perspective. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what I was trying to share with you. And it seems like Sima is raising her hand. Sima?
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear
I
me?
can.
Okay.
Yes.
I was kicked off for a second, so I missed the last couple of minutes. But I would like to say that I agree with a lot of what I heard and some things I don't agree with. First of all, in terms of being Jewish, I'm Jewish, and it is more than a religion. It is a people dating, and if you look at our DNA, it goes all the way back to the Middle East. However, I firmly disagree with what Marc is saying. That what do you mean that we can't, that there is no solution? I have lived with many people from the Middle East. I have lived with Palestinians. I have lived with people from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait. Yeah, we can definitely live together. And I also want to call attention to the fact that there are thousands of Jewish people every day in Israel and outside of Israel, demonstrating against the policies of the Israeli government, demonstrating against the bombing of what's going on in Gaza and the genocide that's being perpetrated in Gaza. And if somebody doesn't think that it's genocide, you can check with several Holocaust or people who are directors of Holocaust foundations have now called it genocide. And I think that that's really important, that we need to know what's actually going on right now. People are dying, kids are dying, and we need to do something about it. And there is a growing number of Jewish people involved in the fight against this. And in fact, of all the groups besides Palestinians and Arabs, Jewish people are some of the loudest demonstrating against the policies of Israel. And I think, was it Sia who said, somebody who talked about George Habash. George Habash was Christian, and he was one of the strongest leaders of the I think he started with the PFLP. But there is a group of people. There are a group of Israelis and Palestinian activists, and they have come up with a solution they are putting out that is getting more attention. I think it's called the Confederation. I think it's called a land for all, 2 states, 1 homeland. And that they're coming up, they have a vision and they have idea and they have a blueprint for how to end the conflict. And I think that it's definitely worth it for people to look at it. And one thing too, and I'm one of those Jewish people that is against Israeli policies. And right now, it's also important for people to know that if you're Jewish or not Jewish, if you are speaking out against what the Israeli government is doing, it's actually very dangerous. 500 executives from Jewish organizations in the United States have signed petitions, signed letters to stop the bombing. And about 100 of them were not able to use their full last names because of fear of repercussion. So it's very hard right now to actually be speaking out. We're almost in a McCarthy era of the dangers of speaking out against what the Israeli government is doing.
Well, thank you so much, Sima. I really appreciate it. And I think Rashid is raised his hand, so is Marc.
Yeah.
Oh, Marc, we're gonna come to you as soon as Rashid finishes. Okay, Rashid, go.
Yeah, I'm so happy that Sima is here because she really represents what, in my view, is a very brave part of the Jewish community. It is not easy to speak out against your own leaders when they are doing wrong things. And
They're not my leaders.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. Yeah, I didn't mean it that way at all. I know, they're not your leaders. But what I mean is speak out against what is perceived to be the interests of their community, which, as she pointed out, is not the interest of their community. And she's right, not only in Israel, but here in the United States and other parts of the world, many, many members of the Jewish community are speaking out, which reinforces my point that this is not a Jewish versus Christian, Jewish versus Muslim issue at all. And if I may just point out here that as far as the question which was raised about the equivalence with South Africa, there are many equivalences here, including the attempt to create what would be Palestinian Bantustans in Gaza and patches of the West Bank, the systematic two-tier legal system with how Palestinians are treated as opposed to how Jewish citizens are treated, the oppression in terms of locking up tens of thousands of people, sometimes in administrative detention without trial for years on end, including minors. These are all parallels, and I think that the moral imperative there is the same as it was in South Africa. That a group of human beings were being treated as being inferior, as a very deliberate part of that policy. So.
Thank you, Doc. So, Marc, back to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to address the issue of genocide. As I mentioned, a lot of words are being slung around in a very loose way. There is no genocide. For there to be a genocide, there would have to be a very sharp decrease in the Palestinian population. But since 1948, the Palestinian population has increased sixfold. And so when there's such a large increase in population, there can't be a genocide. There can be, horrible tragedies, there can be murders, there can be a lot of other things, but it is incorrect to use the word genocide. And I think one of the problems that we all have with this current crisis is that we're slinging around words in much too loose a way. As the other example I gave earlier was the word colonialism. It was the Ottoman Empire that was the colonialist, and yet the word colonialism gets slung around, and similarly the word genocide gets slung around. I think it would be helpful in terms of moving forward, to be a lot less loose with the language that we use.
Well, what I can say now is that, first, I really appreciate each and every one of you, and I will encourage you to continue the discussion, because it's through that discussion that we could learn. For instance, we probably have to visit certain things to get a unified clarity. Say, like, some people say genocide, some people don't think it's genocide. Perhaps if we have a common definition of what genocide means, then we can say, okay, can we look at it this way based on the definition, or can we look at it the other way? And then it would help to turn our discussion to fruitful discussion. Rashid is raising his hand. Okay, go ahead, Rashid.
No, I think this is the position that we are in, where we are afraid to use words to describe events which are actually happening, is the biggest hurdle to actually dealing with this issue. And whether it is colonialism or genocide, whatever, there is a case to be made in both cases. And there are counter arguments to it too, I agree. But if you look at the pronouncements of the present Israeli government's leaders, right, they are openly talking about wiping out or otherwise driving the population of Gaza from that territory openly. Right? openly saying stuff like we cannot fight them as human beings because they are, what was the term he used, human animals, right? This is the language that you heard from Nazis during the Second World War. Even the South African apartheid regime didn't use this language. These people, yep. I'm sorry I'm getting a little upset here, but these people are insane. And the fact that they're in control of a nuclear weapon state is something we should be really scared of. That is what we should be talking about.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Let's, Marc, were you raising your hand, Marc?
Yeah. The last point was a good one, but, there are many sides to these issues. And just as there are some Israeli politicians, who are using ethnic cleansing type language, similarly, the 1987 charter of Hamas uses, almost identical ethnic cleansing language. So what I say about this stuff is that there's plenty of blame to go around. There are no innocent parties. There are just lots and lots of guilty parties, who have much to account for. And once again, I think that it's a poor analogy to South Africa, because in South Africa, there were innocent parties, whereas in the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, there are no innocent parties.
I mean, as a moderator, I would take case with there's no innocent parties in the Palestinian. How could we justify that?
That is just despicable.
All right. I would say this.
I think Siva has his hand raised.
I think what you said, Marc, is an affront to humanity. I think you owe humanity an apology. Can I ask a direct question? Have you, as a white Jewish man, been denied your human rights, your liberties, your voice, and access to wherever? Have you ever been, as a white Jewish man?
Yeah, well, first of all, because I can't speak for all Jews, I can only speak
I'm talking about you. I'm asking you, Marc.
Yeah, no, I can only speak for myself.
Have you been denied?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer your question. Speaking for myself, I went to high school in Northern Virginia. This is just one example. And I remember that in the boys' locker room in that high school, the nice Christian boys would come around when I was changing clothes in the boys' locker room in the gym in Northern Virginia, and they would look to see if I had a tail, because they had been told that Jews had tails. And that was a very common trope in those days. And that Northern Virginia at that time was the headquarters of George Lincoln Rockwell and the neo-Nazi party in the United States. And I had to fight my way through high school with those neo-Nazis in that high school. So the short answer is yes. And those are a couple of examples.
Okay, Marc, the Palestinian people, and for myself as Black people and Mandela and others that we fought against apartheid, we were denied of our humanity, our rights, our dignity. I find it offensive for you to say that the Palestinians have not suffered. I did not.
No. Let's be clear. I did not say anything like that. There's plenty of suffering on all sides. No, at no time, anywhere have I ever written or said that there is not suffering. There is plenty of suffering. Please be more careful about what you're characterizing that I said. Listen more carefully to what I actually said. Nowhere did I say there was not oppression and suffering.
If I may say this to you, I don't appreciate you speaking for me. I'm not invisible. I've got a voice. I can speak my mind. So you try to tell me that
nowhere have I said I was speaking for you. Please listen more carefully. Nowhere did I say I was speaking for you. I have nowhere said that I was speaking for you. I just simply asked the question about whether the situation in South Africa and its history is a good analogy to the situation in Israel and Palestine.
In short, it is a good analogy.
Okay. Okay. Let's leave it there.
Can I just add something, Joseph?
Sure.
I think that we do have people who are, Jewish people and Israeli people also are. If you listen to Gabor Mate, who I love, he talks about the trauma of Jewish people and people in Israel, and plus the trauma of the Palestinians. And what I see, maybe you don't want to make comparisons, but there have been many, many Holocaust survivors who have come out in support of Palestinian rights and who have compared what's going on in Gaza to the Warsaw Ghetto. I mean, I'm overwhelmed sometimes when I see what people are saying or the comparison that people are making. I don't even know what to say, because you could say there's no innocent people. Well, Hamas, what they did was terrorism. What they did was horrible. And we have to have empathy for the people who were killed. But we also have to empathy for the Palestinians. We have 18,000 Palestinians who've been killed. Children, old people, doctors, people who are helping the Palestinians have been killed. And I think it's important to recognize that that's what's going on. It's not even. What's going on is not even. And
actually, it's close to 20,000. That's why
there's a couple of thousand more every day. There's a couple of thousand more. And I just want to say the agenda of the people who are running Israel right now, Netanyahu is a megalomaniac. If he has to stay in office, if he gets deposed, he can go to prison because he's been indicted. The other thing that the people who are running the war, so to speak, the people in his cabinet, Ben Gvir, their kahanas, before Netanyahu was in power, their party was illegal. They kicked Meir Kahane, who started that movement, out of Israel. He was too right-wing even for them. And they have a belief. Then their belief is not Netanyahu, but those other two. Their belief is almost like a Jewish messianic belief. And we also have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the money behind what's going on, and a lot of the people who are behind a lot of the censorship and canceling people in the United States who are speaking out, are the Christian right. The white Christian Zionists are also playing a very important role in this.
Yeah.
Let me say this. I want to tell you that I really, really, really appreciate this engagement. That's engagement of true love and care. Because when we point at things the way we see it, especially the people that we work with, it will enable us to really know if we are putting our hand finger on fire, that's how we know that. If we are doing otherwise, but that engagement is so crucial for all of us. And I'm gonna go to Rashid, but what I would say is this: I would really, really like us to continue this discussion, because some people may say that engaging with one another isn't fruitful. But I can tell you that engaging in this discussion is so imperative for the type of things that I think we need to, the minimum response we could in this particular situation. Rashid, were you opening?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to, I know we are running out of time. I just wanted to say a quick thing here, which is really important for all of us to consider, that whatever Israel is doing should never serve as an excuse for bashing the Jewish community. Anti-Semitism is still around, just like Islamophobia is, and both are despicable ways of looking at the world. They show a shallowness of character of the people who engage in this behavior. And I just wanted to state again, yes, anti-Semitism is a problem, and we need to deal with it, just like Islamophobia is a problem.
Absolutely.
But the way to deal with it is to push for the equal recognition of the humanity of everybody on this planet. I didn't want to make this into a sermon, but I really had to say that because I feel
I
very strongly.
completely concur with that assertion. Marc, were you raising your yeah, Marc?
Yeah, I don't like the use of a few very aged Holocaust survivors, because there are 6 million, dead Holocaust victims, and who speaks for them? So I don't like using that, trucking out a few aged Holocaust survivors in terms of their opinion. I don't think that's appropriate.
All right. It seems like we're still having so many questions here. Let's go to Sima. Did you raise your hand or is it old one? Okay.
No.
Sia, could you make your comment? Then we can be rounding up time. And thank you so much for exercising patience. Go ahead.
Sure. The world is destroyed by bad men because of the silence of a good man or good people. I have fought for the rights of humanity, black, white, pink, yellow, green. I agree, concur with Dr. Rashid that we are not in the business of hating any race, any creed, any person. That's not how I roll. We want to promote the unquestionable rights for all, not just for the Israeli, for all in that part of the world. We want freedom, sustainable freedom for all the people to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be respected, and to be honored, and to be celebrated as fellow human beings. That's my story, and I finish with it.
See why I call you my pastor?
I am.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's okay. Marc, is it old hand or you want to say something, Marc?
No, I'm sorry, I was trying to raise it. Thank you very much. I mean, I was trying to lower it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. No problem. So, if you all agree with me, I think this discussion needs to be going on. And if people feel challenged, I want you to know that it's good. So reflect on your views and, of course, ask the person questions. There's one professor at the University of Chicago whose model I like. I can't remember her name. And she has been working with peace initiatives. It's interesting that younger generation of Palestinian and Jewish people are working together, trying to figure what can be done. Sometimes it makes me wonder, should the United Nations be given the power to say, you know what, older generations should not be ruling. We're gonna get the younger generation to take over if they're gonna get peace. The woman in Chicago, see, let me tell you how she stated it. He said that when you go into discussion, you pay attention. I had Marc say that Sia didn't get exactly what he said, and that was correct. So if the woman contended that when you pay attention closely, the person will finish his statement, then hopefully you pay attention, unlike what we see these days. I don't mean you see ya. These days we see some people, when you are saying something, they don't pay attention, but they try to frame the question that will get to the advantage. And it's sad. But she contended that when you pay attention and get exactly what one said, then you gotta be your turn still to poke into the statements that are not consistent with what you had stated, and then that could be corrected. And then you turn it around, it goes to the other person. And at the end, they found that the problems people somehow create are simply not there because people tuned deaf, so they don't listen. So this discussion, I would like it to continue, but as it continues, we have to bear in mind the number of people who are being needlessly killed, and oftentimes when you look, it's like children. It really breaks my heart. And again, if you go to the other guy, the McLaughlin's statement, which we cited earlier, we've all gone through pains. So we have to figure how do we move forward to create a better place that will fit into Sia had eloquently stated. So I can stop here. Sia, you have more comment to make?
No,
Okay.
I don't.
So I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart, and I want you to persist in getting engaged, in learning about one another, and more importantly, in learning about these issues, having our definitions, our perspectives questioned. I want us to know that when your perspective is questioned, don't internalize it as people going after you. Is an opportunity to reflect, to do more analysis of what it was. And if you still believe that your position is the correct one, then I would not say change. But of course, I'm going to articulate what I think from the bottom of my heart that is good for all human beings. Just as I indicated in our position, we at SDIG are on the quest for peace, equity, and social justice for all, not for some, but for all. And to that end, I want to thank you guys especially. And if you have any other thing that you want to talk to me about, or how we're going to be able to continue to move this engine, because I really think that this needs to be done, please know that you are part of the team. Help us to figure how can we do it better to be able to learn more and be able to see our fellow human beings just as we see ourselves. On that note, that's my end of it. And of course, if you have comment, well, I'm gonna give you opportunity to give us your summary or your closing comments. So with that, let's go to Marc.
I'm sorry, are you asking a question, Joseph?
Yeah, I was asking for a closing comment.
Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate your initiative in the work that you do and on taking on the difficult task. I've learned a lot from the other speakers, and I appreciate the chance to have said a few things. So keep up the good work, and all of you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc. Hey, Rashid, Dr. Rashid, can you give us a closing remark, my friend?
Yeah, well, no, I just want to thank you for organizing this. I think it's so important that people, especially people who have different views on this, get together and talk about it. We always learn something or the other from these exchanges. And even though I think that the best hope for the future lies with the younger generation, it doesn't mean that we oldies should stop talking about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Rashid. Now let's shift gear to the pastor. Could you give us your closing comments?
To thank you, Dr. Nwoye, for organizing such a powerful, inspirational, educational time to reflect, to grow together, to grow in our differences, and not to be to be perturbed or disturbed by the differences, but we to enhance the differences so that we can celebrate the differences and we can grow. So one more thing is Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon with which we can change the world. My world has been changed today by my two colleagues who so powerfully articulated both the historical background to the ideologies of Zionism in Palestine and the nationalism. And I've learned a lot and I've grown. Marc, I want you to apologize for me misunderstanding where you were coming from. And one of the things you get to know me about me, I'm a very passionate person. I speak from the heart. It was not a personal attack, but it was coming from where I was coming from. So please accept my apology.
Thank you.
All right, all right, all right. That's how, I mean, I call you my passport for a reason, because that's the way it goes when we are open to ourselves, open to people we deal with, when we feel we are on the wrong side, you know, for some, you know, unconscious reasons, we're able to reflect on that and move forward. But I'm sure that we're gonna continue this and hopefully begin to do as much as we can. So if nobody has any other comment, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart and ask you to stay the course. And if you think that there's a time we need to get together to continue, just let me know. The platform is yours. We can keep it moving, changing minds, changing heart for good, and supporting one another wherever we can. So on that note, I'll say thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Nwoye. And in conclusion, for SDIG Live today on Saturday, the 16th of December, 2023, from ourselves in our studios, production studios here in London and in Uttar Pradesh in India, we would very much, on behalf of Dr. Joseph Nwoye, President of SDIG, like to thank Dr. Rashid Naim, the Department of Political Science at Georgia State University, Marc Brennan, former Senior Policy Advisor for the Civil Rights at US DART, and also former Executive Director at the Washington State Human Rights Commission. We'd also very much like to thank third member of the panel this afternoon, Mr. Siwa Twani, a keynote speaker, a trainer, a diversity coach and champion, a man who describes himself like a giraffe, stuck his neck out for what he believed and still continues so to do. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on behalf of myself and my team, Shazia Atik in Uttar Pradesh in India, and on behalf of Dr. Joseph Nwoye at SDIG. Thank you very, very much. Have a very good weekend. God bless and good night.